Hello, Symposiast. I'm Dr. Angela Puca, Religious Studies PhD and University Lecturer, and this is your online resource for the academic study of magic, esotericism, paganism, shamanism, and all things occult. And also, it is your resource on demons, or rather, all the academic scholarship that can be found around demons. And today we have a demon to address and cover, and his name is Asmodeus, if we want to use the Latin pronunciation, or if we want to use the pronunciation that you probably are more familiar with as an English speaker, Asmodeus. I think that's how English speakers say it. But yeah, in Latin it would be Asmodeus. So I might pronounce him in different ways depending on, because I'm more used to the Latin pronunciation, but at the same time, I know that for simplicity and because the algorithm is English biased, it's also good for me to pronounce it the way that English speakers do. So I might do a bit of both. So I hope that you are excited for this episode, and if you're interested in all things demonic and left-hand path, I have an online course on my website on the left-hand path of magic with 16 lectures that cover all traditions and all the philosophical underpinnings and all the practices and rituals of left-hand path traditions. And this includes, of course, demonology and demonolatry. So check it out at drangelapuca.com if you're interested. And also this project of delivering you scholarship on all things esoteric is really only possible thanks to your help. So if you have the means, I would massively appreciate it if you supported me by joining my Patreon community, sending PayPal donations, super thanks, super chats when I'm live. Also, you can send me donations on Coffee, and check out my services at drangelapuca.com, as well as signing up for my newsletter. That's free. And it's a way to stay in contact with me regardless of social media algorithms. And also you will get the uncensored version of me, because all social media have their own rules about what you can say and what you cannot say. So on my newsletter, I feel more free to express my thoughts. So if you want to stay in contact with me, it's free. Just sign up on my website. You find all the links in bio, the info box, in a pinned comment, everywhere. So thank you for considering, and let's crack on with the episode. The figure of Asmodeus or Asmodeus occupies a peculiar position within the demonological imagination, one that resists the taxonomical impulses of medieval theologians whilst simultaneously inviting them. His appearances across Persian, Jewish, Christian, and Islamic textual traditions constitute not a coherent biography, but more a series of refractions, each cultural context bending his significance toward its own theological preoccupations. The etymological consensus points toward the Avestan aēšma, the Deva of Wrath, who serves as one of the primary antagonists in Zoroastrian cosmology. Yet to begin with etymology is already confronting the problem that haunts any study of cross-cultural transmission. The movement from aēšma to Ashmedai to Asmodai to Asmodaios represents not just linguistic evolution, but a fundamental reconceptualization of what demonic agency might mean within radically different soteriological frameworks. Consider his earliest narrative appearance in the Book of Tobit, likely composed during the Second Temple period. Here we encounter not the abstract personification of wrath familiar from Zoroastrian texts, but a demon whose primary characteristic appears to be sexual jealousy, or perhaps more accurately, a possessive violence directed at Sarah's suitors. 7 bridegrooms perish on their wedding nights, a detail that has generated considerable speculation about the nature of Asmodeus's claim upon Sarah. Stackenbrock in 1995 reads these as evidence of the demon's erotic desire, whilst Ego from 2003 suggests a more complex dynamic in which Asmodeus functions as an agent of divine testing. What remains unresolved in such debates is whether we should understand this transformation from wrath demon to sexual predator as a deliberate theological innovation or as evidence of a broader pattern in which Persian demonology was adapted to address specifically Jewish concerns about endogamy, purity, and the boundaries of acceptable desire. The methodological challenge here extends beyond simple source criticism. When we trace Asmodeus through his various instantiations, from the Babylonian Talmud's portrayal of him as Solomon's adversary and occasional interlocutor, to his appearance in the Testament of Solomon as a half-human hybrid born of a human mother and an angelic father, we are observing not the corruption of an original essence, but rather the productive instability of demonic figures within religious imagination. The Islamic tradition's identification of Asmodeus with Sakr, the jinn who usurps Solomon's throne by stealing his magical ring, represents yet another permutation, one in which the demon's association with kingship and wisdom becomes paramount. There are not variations on a theme so much as independent compositions that happen to share certain melodic fragments. The temptation to impose retrospective coherence upon this material remains strong, particularly within the framework of comparative demonology that emerged in the 19th century and continues to influence contemporary scholarship. Yet Asmodeus resists such systematization precisely because his function within each tradition exceeds the boundaries of what we might call his character. He is simultaneously a narrative device, a theological problem, and a cultural symptom. To study him is thus to engage with the broader question of how religious communities construct and reconstruct their understanding of evil through the appropriation and transformation of foreign materials. So let's start with the philological archaeology of Asmodeus. The linguistic genealogy of Asmodeus begins in the sacred language of the Avesta, where aēšma appears not as a proper name, but as a category of destructive force integral to the Zoroastrian understanding of cosmic conflict. In the Gathas, Zoroaster's hymns that form the oldest stratum of the Avesta, aēšma stands opposed to Asha, truth or order, functioning as one of the primary weapons in Angra Mainyu's arsenal against creation. The later Pahlavi text, particularly the Bundahish, elaborate this role, describing aēšma as the demon who introduces violence into the world at the moment of Angra Mainyu's assault upon Ohramad's perfect creation. This is not mere personification, but rather a sophisticated theological concept in which affective states are understood to possess autonomous agency within the cosmic drama. The compound formation of aēšma Deva, whilst not directly attested in surviving Avestan texts, can be reconstructed with reasonable confidence based on parallel formations and later Middle Persian evidence. The Pahlani form appears consistently in Sasanian era texts, suggesting either continuity from an earlier oral tradition or a natural linguistic development that would have been transparent to Zoroastrian priests. The transformation of this compound into the Hebrew Ashmedai requires us to posit a period of sustained contact between Jewish and Persian religious specialists, most plausibly during the Achaemenid period, when Jewish scribes would have encountered both the linguistic forms and the theological concepts of Zoroastrianism. Russell in 1987 has traced the phonological shifts with particular precision, noting that the Hebrew form preserves the Persian morphology whilst adapting it to Semitic phonological constraints. The preservation of the dental consonant in the second element, Dai from Deva, rather than its assimilation, suggests a deliberate attempt to maintain the foreign character of the name, marking Asmodeus as explicitly other within the Jewish textual tradition. This linguistic foreignness serves a theological purpose, allowing Jewish authors to acknowledge the reality of demonic forces whilst maintaining their essential alienation from the covenantal community. Yet, the philological evidence alone cannot explain the semantic transformation that occurs as aēšma becomes Asmodeus. In the Zoroastrian context, wrath functions as a cosmic principle, impersonal despite its personification. Within Jewish literature, however, Asmodeus acquires biographical specificity, familial relations, and what we might anachronistically call psychological depth. The Testament of Solomon, dating to perhaps the 1st to 3rd centuries CE, provides him with a genealogy. Born from the union of a human woman to a fallen angel, he embodies the transgression of boundaries that structures so much of Second Temple apocalyptic literature. This hybrid nature, entirely absent from the Persian sources, suggests that the figure of Asmodeus became a site for working through anxieties about categorical pollution that were central to Jewish identity formation in the Hellenistic period. The question of transmission remains vexed. Whilst some scholars have proposed direct textual borrowing, possibly through Aramaic intermediaries, the evidence points instead toward a more diffuse process of cultural osmosis. The appearance of related demonic names in Mandean and Manichaean sources suggests a broader West Asian tradition of demonological speculation in which figures and attributes circulated relatively freely across religious boundaries. In this context, Asmodeus emerges not as a simple loan, but as a synthetic creation, combining Persian linguistic materials with Jewish narrative concerns to produce something genuinely novel. His subsequent proliferation across Christian and Islamic traditions would only multiply these processes of creative misunderstanding and deliberate reinvention. The transformation of Asmodeus within Jewish literary imagination represents something more complex than simple cultural borrowing. It constitutes a theological reconceptualization of demonic agency itself. When he materializes in the Book of Tobit, preserved in Greek manuscripts but with Hebrew and Aramaic fragments discovered in Qumran, he has already undergone a fundamental metamorphosis from cosmic principle to intimate antagonist. Fitzmyer's reconstruction of the Aramaic text from 2003 reveals that the demon's designation as Sheva Bisa, the evil demon, carries none of the Persian etymology, suggesting that for the Qumran community, his foreignness mattered less than his function as a narrative catalyst for exploring the intersection of sexuality, death, and divine providence. The text's claim that Asmodeus loved Sarah has provoked considerable scholarly debate. Nicholas and Wagner in 2010 argue that this detail, absent from the Sinaiticus but present in other Greek witnesses, reflects a later interpretive layer that sought to rationalize the demon's murderous jealousy through the framework of erotic possession. The ritual solution, involving the combustion of fish organs to produce an apotropaic smoke, reflects the broader ancient Near Eastern practices documented in the Assyrian magical corpus, where fumigation serves as a standard technique for expelling malevolent spirits. What distinguishes the Tobit narrative is its integration of this ritual technology into a covenantal framework where angelic mediation through Raphael validates and directs human action against demonic interference. The Testament of Solomon, which dueling dates to between the 1st and 3rd centuries CE, based on its syncretic blend of Jewish, Greek, and early Christian elements, fundamentally reimagines Asmodeus' relationship to power and knowledge. When compelled to reveal his genealogy, the demon claims descent from an angel who fell in love with a woman, a formulation that echoes the Enochic tradition of the Watchers whilst inverting it. McCown's critical edition in 1922 notes significant manuscript variations in Asmodeus' self-description, with some witnesses emphasizing his role in destroying marriages through jealousy, whilst others expand his portfolio to include the teaching of mathematics and astronomy. These This oscillation between destroyer and instructor anticipates the later grimoire tradition's portrayal of demons as repositories of forbidden knowledge. The Babylonian Talmud's treatment in Tractate Gittin operates within an entirely different literary register. Here, Ashmedai functions less as a theological problem than as a narrative foil for exploring the limits of Solomonic wisdom. Kiberwasser and Shapira in 2014 have demonstrated through comparative analysis of Palestinian and Babylonian recensions that the story underwent significant elaboration in the Babylonian context, where Ashmedai's temporary usurpation of Solomon's throne serves as a meditation on the fragility of political authority. The detail that Ashmedai assists a blind man and explains his seemingly contradictory behavior with the aphorism, "They announce in heaven before they announce on earth," transforms him from simple antagonist into an inadvertent revealer of divine justice's mysterious workings. What emerges from this survey of Jewish sources is not really a unified demonological portrait. So as we can see from these Jewish sources, we don't see a unified demonological portrait. We see a sustained exploration of how foreign religious materials might be metabolized within monotheistic frameworks. Bar Ilan in 1995 has argued persuasively that the rabbinic tradition's ambivalent portrayal of Ashmedai, simultaneously dangerous and oddly sympathetic, reflects the anxieties about the porousness of religious boundaries in the Sasanian period. The demon becomes a liminal figure through whom Jewish communities could negotiate their relationship to surrounding religious cultures whilst maintaining their distinctive theological commitments. His repeated association with Solomon, the paradigmatic wise king who nonetheless falls into error, suggests a perpetual reminder of wisdom's limits and the ever-present possibility of its corruption. The Christian reception of Asmodeus unfolds through a process of selective inheritance and systematic reinterpretation. The inclusion of Tobit in the Septuagint and subsequently in Jerome's Vulgate ensured that Western Christianity would encounter Asmodeus as a canonical demon, already embedded within scripture rather than imported from apocryphal sources. Augustine's brief treatment in De Civitate Dei acknowledges the demon's role in Tobit whilst subordinating him to a providential framework wherein even demonic opposition serves divine purposes. This Augustinian reading established a hermeneutical pattern that would persist throughout medieval exegesis. Asmodeus as unwitting instrument of divine pedagogy. The medieval period witnessed Asmodeus's gradual systematization within an increasingly elaborate demonological taxonomy. The Dominican inquisitor Nicholas Eymerich, writing in the 14th century, includes Asmodeus among the princes of hell in his Directorium Inquisitorum, though without yet assigning him to a specific vice. It is only with Peter Binfeld's De Confessionibus Maleficorum et Sagarum from 1589 that we find the explicit correlation between Asmodeus and Luxuria that would become definite for subsequent demonology. That would be lost, by the way. Binfeld's schema, which assigns each deadly sin its corresponding demon, reflects the Counter-Reformation's intensified concern with moral classification and the systematic cataloging of spiritual dangers. The possession cases at Loudun from 1632 to 1634 mark a crucial moment in Asmodeus' transition from textual figure to experiential reality within Catholic France. The detailed records compiled by the exorcists, particularly those of Father Jean-Joseph Surin, describe how Sister Jeanne de Angers claimed to be possessed by 7 demons. with Asmodeus specifically responsible for impure thoughts and blasphemous impulses. What makes the Loudun case particularly significant is its juridical dimension. The alleged possession became evidence in the trial and execution of Urbain Grandier, accused of having made a pact with the demons tormenting the nuns. Ferber has shown how the invocation of Asmodeus by name served to authenticate the possession within a legal framework that required the specific identification of demonic agents. The Protestant tradition's engagement with Asmodeus follows a markedly different trajectory. Johann Weyer's De Prestigis Demonum from 1563, written partly as a critique of witch hunting, includes Asmodeus in his Pseudomonarchia Demonum, with the curious note that the demon teaches geometry, arithmetic, astronomy, and mechanics. This emphasis on Asmodeus as a teacher of the mathematical sciences reflects Weyer's broader skepticism about demonological claims. By presenting demons as professional figures rather than agents of destruction, he subtly undermines the basis for persecution. Ironically, Weyer's rationalist catalogue would be appropriated by later occultists who read it not as satire but as practical instruction. The visual culture of Christian demonology reaches its apex in Louis de Breton's engravings for Colin de Plancy's Dictionnaire Infernal, the 1863 edition. Le Breton's Asmodeus, with his three heads, human bull ram, serpentine tail, and goose feet, sitting astride a dragon whilst bearing the banner of lance of hellish dignity, crystallizes centuries of accumulated iconographic tradition. Reed in 2023 has recently argued that these images don't really function as literal depictions, but as demonological emblems that encode complex theological and moral concepts within apparently grotesque forms. The triple-headed configuration, for instance, parodies the Trinity, whilst the mixture of animal forms suggests the confusion of natural categories that follows from sin. The absence of Asmodeus from the Quranic text necessitates a different mode of incorporation into Islamic demonology, or rather I should say Islamicate, actually. One that really proceeded through exegetical expansion rather than scriptural citation. The cryptic reference in Surah Sa'd to a Yasad body placed upon Solomon's throne prompted extensive speculation among the Mufassirun. Al-Tabari in 1923 CE, synthesizing earlier traditions in his monumental Tafsir, relates multiple versions of how a jinn named Sakhr assumed Solomon's appearance and ruled in his stead for 40 days. The name Sakhr, meaning rock in Arabic, appears to be an indigenous designation rather than a translation of Asmodeus, though the narrative parallels with the Talmudic account are unmistakable. Ibn Kathir's 14th century commentary provides additional details that reveal the Islamicate tradition's distinctive concerns. In his version, the usurpation occurs as divine punishment for Solomon's temporary lapse, variously attributed to marrying a foreign woman who continued idolatrous practices or to pride in his power over the jinn. Variously attributed to marrying a foreign woman who continued idolatrous practices or to pride in his power over the jinn. The restoration of Solomon's authority comes only after a period of wandering as a beggar, a humiliation that serves the tawbah, repentance, and restores his prophetic station. Wheeler in 2002 has traced these narrative elements through earlier Jewish and Christian sources and shows how Islamic exegetes selectively adopted and modified Aggadic materials to align with Quranic theology and prophetic impeccability. The figure of Sakhr Asmodeus also appears in the Izrach Iliad literature, those traditions of Jewish or Christian origin that entered Islamic scholarship through converts and cultural exchange. Al-Qisais Qisas al-Anbiya Stories of the Prophets elaborates the throne usurpation narrative with novelistic detail, including Sachr's inability to approach Solomon's wives due to their purity and his exposure when he fails to perform ritual ablutions correctly. These details, whilst not considered canonical, circulated widely in popular Islamic culture and influenced later Persian and Turkish retellings of the Solomon cycle. The magical literature presents yet another facet of Islamic engagement with this figure. In texts such as Al-Buni's Shams al-Mahrif al-Kubra, we find references to Ashmedai among the names of jinn kings, which may suggest direct borrowing from Hebrew sources rather than translation through the Sachr identification. The 13th century author includes him in elaborate cosmological schemes linking jinn to planets, days of the week, and specific types of magical operation. This reception occurs entirely outside Orthodox theological discourse in manuscripts circulated among practitioners of Ilm al-Ruhaniyya, spiritual science, who were less concerned with scriptural authority than with practical efficacy. Contemporary scholarship has increasingly recognized the importance of these minor traditions for understanding the full scope of Islamic demonology. Zadeh, in 2014, argues that figures like Sachr Asmodeus can be seen as a narrative bridge that allowed Muslim scholars to engage with the broader Abrahamic tradition whilst maintaining the theological distinctiveness of Islamic revelation. The substitution of names, Sachr for Asmodeus, combined with the preservation of narrative structure, suggests a sophisticated strategy of cultural translation that acknowledged shared heritage whilst asserting independent authority. The incorporation of Asmodeus into Renaissance magical literature marks a distinctive shift from narrative theology to operational occultism. The manuscripts that would eventually be compiled as the Lemegeton or Lesser Key of Solomon present Asmodai, the Grimoire spelling, as the 32nd spirit in the hierarchy, a great king who appears when properly conjured with 3 heads, whereof the first is like a bull, the second like a man, and the third like a ram. This iconography, absent from earlier Jewish and Islamic sources, appears to derive from astrological symbolism, with the 3 heads potentially corresponding to zodiacal signs associated with Venus, Taurus, Mercury, Virgo, Gemini, and Mars, Aries, creating a complex planetary signature that informed ritual timing and material correspondences. Recent manuscript studies have complicated the traditional attribution of these texts to medieval origins. Classen has demonstrated through paleographical analysis that most surviving grimoire manuscripts date to the 16th and 17th centuries, meaning the systematization of demon hierarchies coincided with the early modern period's broader taxonomical impulses. The description of Asmodai's powers in the Ars Goetia portion of the Lemegeton reflects distinctly Renaissance preoccupations. He teaches the liberal sciences, makes one invincible, discovers treasures that have been hid, and reveals all questions thou mayest ask. This portfolio combines medieval associations with lust and discord with humanistic interest in learning and early capitalist concerns with hidden wealth. Johann Weyer's Pseudomonarchia Daemonum from 1563, despite its author's skeptical intentions, provided one of the most influential codifications of demonic hierarchy for subsequent occultists. Weyer, physician to Duke William of Cleves, compiled his catalogue partly from manuscript sources and partly from the confessions of accused witches, though he regarded the entire system as evidence of mental illness rather than spiritual reality. His entry for Asmodai closely parallels the Lemegeton, but adds the crucial detail that the conjurer must stand during the operation and remove their cap in respect. Otherwise, Amaimon will deceive him. This reference to Amaimon, one of the 4 directional demon kings, situates Asmodai within a broader cosmological framework borrowed from Arabic magical traditions. The visual standardization of Asmodeus achieves its definitive form in Colin de Plancy's Dictionnaire Infernal, particularly the 1863 edition featuring Louis Le Breton's engravings. Davies has traced how de Plancy's work, initially published in 1818 as a skeptical encyclopedia influenced by Enlightenment rationalism, was revised in later editions to align with Catholic orthodoxy after the author's conversion. The addition of Le Breton's images transformed what had been a literary compilation into a visual grimoire that fixed demonic appearances in popular imagination. The specific detail that Asmodeus oversees gambling houses in hell appears to be de Plancy's innovation, reflecting 19th century anxieties about games of chance and financial speculation that had no precedent in earlier demonological tradition. The Grimoire tradition's treatment of Asmodeus reveals a fundamental epistemological shift in European approaches to demonic knowledge. Véronique Champion-Vincent has argued that Renaissance grimoires represent a democratization of magic, whereby techniques previously restricted to learned clergy became available to literate lay people through manuscript circulation and eventually print. The precise instructions for conjuring Asmodai, complete with required materials, his metal is copper, his planet Venus, his zodiacal degrees 5 to 9 of Aquarius, transform him from a theological concept into a technical problem requiring proper procedure rather than moral authority. The systematization reaches its Baroque culmination in works like the Grimorium Verum and the Grand Grimoire, both likely 18th century productions, despite their claims to greater antiquity. Here Asmodeus appears not merely as an individual spirit, but as a node in elaborate infernal bureaucracies, complete with subordinate demons, specific offices, and detailed protocols for engagement. Leach notes that these late grimoires often combine elements from the Solomonic tradition with folk Catholic practices, and create hybrid systems that blur the boundaries between Orthodox religion and operative magic. The persistence of Asmodeus across these varied magical traditions suggests his particular utility as a figure who could mediate between the diabolic and the mundane, and offer worldly knowledge and advantage whilst maintaining his fundamentally transgressive character. The 19th century occult revival fundamentally reconceptualized Asmodeus and transformed him from a figure of moral warning or social satire into a component of elaborate magical systems. Eliphas Lévy, Alphonse Louis Constant, whose Dogme rituel de la haute magie from 1854-1856, established many of the parameters for modern ceremonial magic, incorporated Asmodeus into his synthesis of Kabbalistic, Hermetic, and Christian symbolism. And really, for Lévy, Asmodeus didn't represent an external deity, but a principle of cosmic imbalance, specifically the blind force of passion when divorced from spiritual aspiration. This psychological reading, which interprets demons as aspects of human consciousness rather than autonomous beings, would profoundly influence subsequent esoteric thought. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, founded in 1887, systematized this approach through their elaborate correspondence tables. In documents such as the complete symbol of the Rose Cross and the Z documents describing their initiation rituals, Asmodeus appears mapped onto the Kabbalistic tree of life, specifically associated with the Qlīphot, shells or husks, corresponding to Geburah's severe aspect. This placement within a comprehensive symbolic system transformed the demon from narrative character to operational concept, something to be understood through meditation and ritual rather than exorcism or propitiation. Aleister Crowley's Thelemic system, whilst rarely focusing explicitly on Asmodeus, incorporated him into the broader framework of the Goetic spirits as psychological complexes to be integrated rather than banished. In his commentary on the Goetia from 1904, Crowley interprets the demons as portions of the human brain, whose names and forms provide handles for psychological manipulation. This reading, influenced by his study of yoga and Buddhism as well as Western Esotericism, represents a thorough psychologization of the demonic that would become standard in much 20th century occultism. The influence of depth psychology on modern interpretations of Asmodeus cannot be overstated. Jung's concept of the shadow, though not directly addressing this specific demon, provided a framework within which figures like Asmodeus could be understood as projected aspects of repressed desire. Contemporary Jungian interpreters like Sanford have explicitly connected demons from various traditions to shadow work and argued that confronting figures like Asmodeus in active imagination or ritual context facilitates psychological integration. Chaos magic, which emerged in the late 1970s through the work of Peter Carroll and Ray Sherwin, took a radically pragmatic approach to Asmodeus and other traditional demons. In texts like Carroll's Liber-Null and Psychonaut from 1987, entities like Asmodeus are treated as useful fictions whose reality is less important than their efficacy in achieving desired results. This stance, which Hanegraaff describes as postmodern magic, treats the entire demonological tradition as a reservoir of symbols available for recombination according to individual needs rather than traditional prescription. Contemporary left-hand path traditions, particularly those influenced by the Temple of Set and later organizations, have embraced Asmodeus as a symbol of antinomian sexuality and self-deification. Ford's Luciferian Goetia from 2007 presents Asmodeus as an angelic ruler whose essence can be absorbed through invocation to enhance personal power and break sexual taboos. This positive reevaluation of traditionally negative figures shows what Granholm identifies as the left-hand path's systematic inversion of Christian moral categories. Digital culture has created new context for Asmodean practice and interpretation. Online communities devoted to demon work share rituals, experiences, and interpretations through forums, social media, and video platforms. Aspram has documented how these digital spaces create new forms of esoteric community that bypass traditional initiatory structures and also allow for rapid innovation and syncretism in magical practice. Within these spaces, Asmodeus functions simultaneously as a traditional Goetic spirit, a psychological archetype, a pop culture reference, and a personal ally, with practitioners freely mixing these interpretations according to their needs. To conclude, the trajectory of Asmodeus from Zoroastrian deva to digital age deity shows less about the essential nature of demons than about the cultures that continually reconstruct them. Each historical moment has discovered in this figure precisely what it needed: a personification of cosmic wrath for Zoroastrian dualists, a threat to sexual and genealogical order for Second Temple Jews, a challenge to prophetic authority for Muslim exegetes, a taxonomical entry in the ledger of sins for Christian demonologists, a satirical device for Enlightenment writers, and a symbol of liberation for contemporary occultists. These transformations do not represent corruption or revolution so much as a continuous process of cultural production in which the demonic serves as a screen for projection of collective anxieties and aspirations. Fanger has argued that demons like Asmodeus function as boundary objects in the sociology of knowledge, entities that maintain enough coherence to be recognizable across different communities, whilst being plastic enough to adapt to local needs. This theoretical framework helps explain how a figure can simultaneously exist in academic demonology, popular fiction, religious discourse, and magical practice. Without these various incarnations necessarily contradicting each other. Each community constructs its own Asmodeus whilst drawing on a shared reservoir of images, names, and narratives. The persistence of Asmodeus in contemporary culture, from his appearance in Neil Gaiman's Good Omens to his role in television series like Supernatural and games like Dungeons and Dragons, suggests that the demon continues to serve important cultural functions even in supposedly secular contexts. These popular culture manifestations, whilst often bearing little resemblance to their religious antecedents, maintain the core association with transgressive desire and dangerous knowledge that has characterized Asmodeus since his earliest appearances. Smith argues that such popular deployments of traditional religious figures don't represent trivialization, but a form of vernacular theology through which contemporary societies work through questions of evil, desire, and power. The methodological implications of studying a figure like Asmodeus extend beyond demonology proper to encompass broader questions about cultural transmission, religious adaptation, and the construction of evil as a category. His transformations across linguistic, religious, and cultural boundaries show the inadequacy of approaches that assume stable meanings or linear development. Instead, as Lincoln suggests in his work on myth, we must understand figures like Asmodeus as ideological narratives that both reflect and shape the societies that tell them. What emerges from this survey is not a biography of a demon, but an archaeology of human concerns about desire, knowledge, and power, as they have been articulated through a particular name and its associated narratives. The fact that Asmodeus continues to be invoked, reimagined, and reinvented suggests that these concerns remain active and require symbolic forms through which they can be engaged. Whether appearing as the wrathful aēšma of Zoroastrian cosmology, the jealous demon of Tobit, the limping devil of Lesage, or the liberating spirit of contemporary occultism, Asmodeus is a constant reminder that human cultures have always needed figures through which to confront what most disturbs and attracts them. The study of Asmodeus thus becomes a study of ourselves, our fears, our desires, and our persistent need to give form to forces that threaten the boundaries we construct between order and chaos, sacred and profane, self and other. That this particular demon has proven so adaptable, surviving the collapse of empires and the transformation of entire religious systems, suggests something essential about the role such figures play in human meaning-making. They are not relics of primitive superstition, but active components in the ongoing human project of understanding and managing the complexities of existence. In tracing Asmodeus, we trace the history of human ambivalence towards power, sexuality, and knowledge itself, finding in these demons' many faces a mirror of our own unresolved tensions. Thank you very much for listening and watching until this point. These are a lot of references that will never fit into the description box, so I put them here. And yeah, if you watched until this point, I'd like you to give me is there a bull emoji? If there is a bull emoji, I know that I'm always very demanding on these emojis that you guys always struggle to find, but if you don't find it, you can just type bull, and then so that I will know that you watched until this point, that you're very committed to your learning, and that I'm very proud of you. So your emoji sharing is me saying, oh, I'm proud of you. You watched until this point. So I also want to know in the comments what you thought about this episode, whether you're a practitioner or a scholar, what has been your engagement with Asmodeus or Asmodeus, if you don't mind sharing. I'd love to hear all of that. I'm very interested both in the perspective of scholars and in the perspective of practitioners, as you guys know. So yeah, I hope that you enjoyed it. And if you did, and you want me to make more videos on everything occult and esoteric and pagan from an academic point of view, I would highly appreciate it if you consider supporting me and my work, because that's how this project stays alive. By joining my fantastic and growing Patreon community, we have monthly lectures, a book club, a Discord server. We also have Zoom calls every month, so you have the chance to talk with me in the community and ask me all of your questions. And yeah, it's just a great community. I love my patrons, so I'd love for you to be part of that fantastic community. So besides being a way of supporting my work, it's just being part of an amazing group of people. So that's why that's the first thing that I mentioned, because otherwise I could just say to send me donations on PayPal and Coffee, which would and also help a lot my project, but I'd really like for you to be part of the community, because I really care about community. So yeah, those are all the ways to support my work. You find them in bio, the info box, in the chat, or you can also join my YouTube membership. That's also another way of entering my community, because you also get access to my Discord server and so on. So yeah, and don't forget to sign up for my newsletter. It's free and allows you to stay in touch with me. And if you like this video, don't forget to smash the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And I know that half of you who watch my videos are not subscribed. So what are you doing? Go and subscribe, and activate the notification bell as well, so that every time that I upload a new video, you will get a notification and you will not miss out on any esoteric content that is produced over here. And yeah, let me know in the comments what you thought, and share my videos around so that the symposium can grow. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so glad that you stayed with me until the end, and I hope that you stay tuned for the next time for all the academic fun. Today we hold that we'll never disappoint.